This is Senate. We are live. Good morning. This is Senate Judiciary, Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. And today we're first taking up community-based restorative justice services and their budgets, which is our focus. As we also have a bill, H645, I think it is, that we'll be taking up on Friday. But if anybody who's here today wants to make a comment about that bill and its potential impact on the services either you provide or the money that you provide, feel free to do so. So, good morning, Gail. I'm going to start with Derek Middle-Wink. I hope I didn't screw it up too bad, Derek.
Give it an above pass.
I'm in the passing range, yeah.
Yeah, which, so for the record, Derek Miodovnik, Community and Restorative Justice Executive with Vermont Department of Corrections. And my understanding is that the committee would like to clarify some understanding about the amounts and perhaps the specific purposes therein of the funding that DOC provides to our community and restorative justice statewide partners. Yes? Mm-hmm. What would be most helpful in terms of...
Most helpful, you in your base budget, the governor's budget, and I don't know what the House did, but it was about $2 million for restorative justice. And there was the providers, the community justice centers have felt that they're getting a $900,000 cut.
Yeah.
And I did speak with the commissioner about that. He said that that money was one time from justice reinvestment. And I'm curious about, so I don't know if the exact amount was $2 million that's in your base for the community justice centers, but what is the status of the 900,000?
So I think what might be the best way for me to address that might be to reshare, if I may, communication from Commissioner Dimmel to the chair that details some of that for the purposes of just repeating that information. Thank you.
Since it came to me.
Exactly. Yeah. So this was a communication dated February 13th of 2024. And I'll just be reading
I wonder
this.
if we can have afterwards Kev Ben make copies for the committee.
Absolutely. Good evening, Senator Sears. Thank you for flagging your constituents' issue for our consideration. And I believe that issue was the question at hand about the perceived cut to the community justice providers that DOC supports. We reviewed the concern and studied the FY24 and proposed FY25 budgets to provide some clarity to you and for your passage to your constituent. No cut to base funding is contemplated by the department in the proposed FY25 budget. The CJC, which is shorthand for Community Justice Center, funding line remains stable at $2,961,000. However, your constituent is right to flag that they will feel a downward pressure resulting from the end of one-time funds that were granted to CJCs in FY24. Two separate one-time funding grants were issued to CJCs in FY24, one totaling $340,000 $342,247. I'll repeat that just in case folks are taking notes. $342,247, resulting from out-of-state bed savings reappropriated to justice reinvestment, and one totaling $250,000. Again, that's $250,000 from the justice reinvestment base budget on the recommendation of the Coordinated Justice Reform Advisory Council. In total, these one-time appropriations equaled $592,247. Point of clarification, the communication that I'm reading from says they equaled $442,247, but that was a slight typo.
Yep.
And the total, when you total 342, 247, and 250, you get 592, 247.
Okay.
As you may recall, the out-of-state bed savings are no longer accumulated, and instead the administration and the legislature agreed to lower the budgeted funds for the out-of-state contract and reallocate that funding to the justice reinvestment line in the department's budget. This line totals $899,000. Okay? The CJRC, which is the Coordinated Justice Reform Council, did not recommend how the FY25 funds should be appropriated. The CJRC met yesterday, again, this was dated February 13th, to discuss the issue and is working on a plan to inform its recommendations. The department is waiting on the CJRC for its recommendations prior to making a recommendation on same. The department requested recommendations from CJRC before May 1st, 2024, so the recommendations can be considered in the granting process for FY25. So we're still in that waiting period right now. Because this recommendation and council process is new, the CJRC process is still being designed. CJRC's recommendations may result in increased funding to the CJCs, but that will not likely be known until at least May 2024. Great, is that the communication? Fantastic, thank you so much. And I'm almost done reading it. Simply put, no department-based funding for CJCs is in jeopardy. Again, no base funding, I'll repeat that. And we define base funding as what's legislatively appropriated in our base funding as opposed to, the justice reinvestment mechanisms. FY24 one-time funds did end. Thus, the CJCs will receive less money in FY25 than they did in FY24. The CJRC may recommend additional funding for the CJCs as part of its process, which may be included in the department's recommendation to the governor. I hope that helps. I've included a few attachments for your review and consideration that document the funding in question. Please let me know if you wish to discuss further. Warm regards, Nick, who has joined us.
Present.
I'll stop reading his words now that I tried to give it some some interpretive value.
It's still in dispute, and it's something that we'll have to work out. And I also hope that in the future the group, the new group, the criminal justice,
coordinated
Council,
justice reform
make its
council.
recommendations in line with in a more timely manner so that it fits the budget, so that the people who might be receiving the money are more aware in January rather than in May, which is oftentimes after the budget has already been completed and agreed to. So the other complication is that I read the letter of intent from Jane Kitchell and Diane Lamprey, the chairs of the appropriations committees, and their intent was that the 592,000 was ongoing in their letter of intent to the to finance and management. So that may have also led to some of the confusion. Senator Shane.
Thank you. I don't know if I missed a hearing or a meeting earlier, but I feel like I'm missing what the context is of this presentation and what the constituents. I mean, now after having heard you, I understand. I can jump to conclusions, but what is the issue for consideration, and what is the concern that we're?
Well, there's two concerns. One is the $900,000 that the CRJs believe they've been cut by. The other is the $2 million or actually $3 million that's base budget for the CRJs and that the Department of Corrections provides. The thing I'm trying to understand is why we have three different funding sources that are all state government. One is the Department of Corrections, one is DCF, and one is the Attorney General's office. So you have three different funding sources for the same purpose, basically. And each department is doing their own thing, and we'll hear from DCF shortly, and then the Attorney General or vice versa. So there may be a recommendation from this committee that it all go into one pile and be, it would be more uniform. And I'm not sure why we ended up with, three funding sources, but for the community justice centers, what has been a concern is that they're dealing with three different state agencies. They're having to apply for grants from three. They're having to be, audited by three. But all the stuff that you have to go through as a private provider is not just one agency, but three agencies of state government. If you include the Attorney General as an agency of state government, which I think in this case you could, even though they're not really elected. So I think that's the issue. Is that all?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Senator Shears, I certainly understand and I think that the sort of multiple funding streams and multiple organizations is confusing. I've actually thought a lot about this, and I think it's probably going to be a bigger issue than we're going to open up here, because I actually wonder if in the long run what makes sense is creating a Department of Restorative Justice that then works with all of the agencies. But I think that's a sort of unified space, but I think that's a much bigger conversation.
Much bigger conversation, but so maybe if you could provide us with a little bit of what you do with 2.9, that's not in dispute. And was it increased this year, or is it the same?
So this current year, FY24.
Right, it's 2.9. What is
that base was not increased. However, it was supplemented through the out-of-state bed savings that were mechanized through Justice Reinvestment 2. So functionally, our grantees received increases. However, they were not sustained through an increase.
Is the 2.9 part of the recommendation from the governor budget?
That is my
did not increase by.
That is my understanding, that we maintained a level funded recommend for the base budget.
And whatever they can get from Justice Reinvestment would be added.
Which remains to be seen via the council, right?
Senator Browski.
So I have concerns about level funding, because as you know, with inflation, that is essentially a cut to funding. And if we're really invested in restorative justice, I think we need to be looking at actually investing in restorative justice. So I have concerns about a level fund.
Yeah. Well, the plan is for us to make recommendations to the appropriation.
Yes.
At some point. So this will be part of our.
If I may, in response to your earlier invitation to include any germane perspectives on the bill that you'll be taking up on Friday, H645, which seeks to expand pre-charge court diversion. I think part of the conversation on the appropriations aspect of that is to consider where the funding for that expansion would need to come from. And and I believe part of the conversation to date has contemplated that some of that funding would in fact further come from the 2.9 million that the DOC provides grants, because to your question, Chair Sears, our current scope of work within the grants to our providers permits for the capacity to accept pre-charge referrals. So across the state, based on the prosecutorial discretion of the state's attorneys, various DOC-funded providers do varying case volume in the pre-charge space monetized through DOC grants. And I believe, again, there's at least an active interest in understanding how much DOC's monies go to that, with an eye toward perhaps moving that over to the Attorney General's office. So at a minimum, my point being that we're hoping to not go backwards and incur an actual cut to this. And I don't disagree with your initial statement that with rising costs, level still amounts cut. That's why we use JRI monies in the absence of new base, at least to try to build a bridge to that other point. But, I can't speak to that bridging piece in terms of the governor's recommend, but I can speak to concern that if the base funds that DOC gets also are negatively impacted by H 645, then we have, in fact, really taken a capacity step backwards in terms of what DOC procures. I'm happy to detail what that is. To your question, Chair Sears, you had asked, what does that $2.9 million give us that's not in dispute? Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, and I'm happy to submit this after testimony too. But
how many community justice centers or other agencies do you support with that 2.9 million?
Yeah, so we have grants with 17 different nonprofit or municipal agencies that comprise our portfolio of community and restorative justice service providers.
Yeah, do you have a name for yours? Like the
well,
DCF is called BARJ, BARJ.
The naming piece has been the source of a lot of confusion, because the sort of vernacular, if you will, has been community justice center for a long time. However, where that's gotten complicated is that when DOC took that naming convention, we basically called a scope of work a center, and we granted that out. But then different entities that we granted to through other sources of funding, not from DOC, would sometimes layer in other work, sometimes from the Attorney General's office, and sometimes from the Department of Children and Families, sometimes from outside sources. So the title Community Justice Center has become, I think, sufficiently confounding, because multiple agencies, for understandable reasons, lay claim to that kind of nomenclature, and yet it means something different in different places. And if, from a representative perspective, I think that's probably challenging for legislators as well.
Just so I understand, so the 17 different nonprofits have to.
Well, they're not all nonprofits. Some of their actual grants, including here in Montpelier, we actually have a grant with the city.
You provide those funding for restorative justice programs, and they're obviously in the community, blah, blah, blah. Restorative justice started several years ago as part of I think it was John Gorchak was the commissioner at the time. And John believes strongly in restorative justice. So DOC got into it from that, but then we already had what was called court diversion programs.
Absolutely.
Which were similar, but not the same name. And then DCF got involved with restorative justice for kids, and they called theirs barge. And so we have three different agencies doing essentially funding some similar program. And it's always confusing. But you were actually the lead in the beginning, I think. We had diversion before we had restorative justice, but I don't know how diversion was or wasn't restorative justice. But maybe we can better understand how this happened. But I just, I don't have any other questions, Derek, except that the commissioner would like to comment since he was scheduled first. And I don't know.
By all means.
But I missed the last meeting of the group that determines the funding and the council. So maybe the commissioner attended and could update us on the council.
Thank you. At your disposal if you need any other detail.
Thank you, Derek.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
I know there was a little confusion at first, which there always seems to be.
Certainly, that was only on our side.
Wow. No, I think I was confused too.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you back.
Nice to see you
I
guys.
guess we're gonna see you a lot lately. You know, we've got a couple of bills coming up.
Yeah.
And the institutions, Senate Institutions Committee has asked us to look at the women's prison capital bill.
Great.
So
Yeah, we'd love to come in
areas.
and speak with you about that.
Don't forget that, Ben. Seems like yesterday we were talking about women's prisons. So, anyway, in terms of restorative justice.
Yeah. Yeah. So good morning. My name is Nick Dunlop. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Corrections. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all. Yeah, I think your comments just a minute ago, Chair, about how the department got into this space are a nice segue to just highlight this continues to be restorative justice work continues to be a key priority of our department. I think that we have long championed this work. Vermont's been one of the nation's leaders in restorative justice from its very inception through today. Coincidentally, I was just talking with a national reporter yesterday, and for 40 minutes we talked about Vermont's restorative justice work and how important this is, and some of the ways we're trying to innovate in that space and build new programs to tackle some of our really vexing problems like domestic violence work. And the structure and the funding, I think, are really complicated and confusing questions, even for me, who's now spent 3 years trying to untangle this and figure it all out. You know, I've met with the CJCs a number of times over the last few years, and I try to start each of those meetings by highlighting how much I believe in the CJC model. I think it's a beautiful, if not complicated and confusing, a beautiful structure that has grown up organically in Vermont, and we have them geographically dispersed so that they serve all of our communities. There's funding from municipalities, there's kind of local, like hyper local community buy-in in these programs, and you have funding from the state. And so there's, you know, across the spectrum, there's interest and investment. You know, the department is, if not the largest funder, certainly right up there with the AGO as the primary funding source for community justice centers and for restorative justice work. And trying to figure out how to marry up the different funding streams so that there's not duplication, there's not overlap, and that we can really make the CJCs highly effective has been the area of our focus. We've done a study in the last year or two of the CJCs. We've tried to work with the CJCs. And I think, you know, it's an interesting irony, in my opinion, that I think from the department's perspective, we were a bit on the cusp of trying to really strategically plan for the future of CJCs and how we would fund that. And then the House introduced their bill that basically would redo all of these funding structures. And it really put a kibosh, it put a stop to our work, because we can't go through all that work, redesign all of our funding, try to find new funding, convince the powers that be that it's a worthy investment, only to then have the legislature change all of the structure of that and start from scratch. And I, Derek did a nice job reading my note back to you, Senator, but I guess the one editorial I would add to that is I'm a bit disheartened to hear that that's the perspective of the CJCs right now, in part because we do have base funding. DOC provides base funding to the CJCs. But every year that I've been commissioner and at Derek's urging, we have gone out and tried to find additional money, even though it's one-time money, and we know the limitations of that, but to add more money into the mix. And we were very clear that that's one-time money. We will continue to try to find new base money to put into the CJCs because we really believe in that work. But until we can do that, we'll keep trying to scrape together that extra money on the side and put it on top, only then to be rewarded with I can't believe DOC is cutting our budget. And I just don't think that it's not accurate, and I don't think it's a fair statement to make about DOC, because we have worked very hard to try to push money and resources into the CJCs and into restorative justice work. And we were very clear up front so that we didn't run into this problem of you're cutting our budget. Well, that's not quite accurate. We don't have the one-time money this year that we had last year or the year before. But the Coordinated Justice Reform Council that you mentioned, Senator, did recommend, I think, a $250,000 or so additional one-time appropriation for the CJCs this year. That's supported by the governor's budget. We proposed that to the appropriations committees. The department fully supports that. If there's other money we can find, we certainly will try to put that into restorative justice work and specifically the CJCs. But I think we have been a very honest broker and a very invested participant in trying to build out restorative justice work in the state and CJCs. And I think we take sometimes an unfair amount of the blame for things that maybe aren't the way people want them to be.
Well, join the group.
Yes, I know you have no experience
As
with that.
legislators, I frequently do. It was a nice article, I thought it was a pretty good story in WCAX and in the local paper about S58. And immediately I get a thing from one of my constituents. Why in the hell do you provide free Narcan and not free EpiPens?
No good deed goes unpunished.
No good deed goes unpunished in this business.
Right.
Senator Kowalski.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate that Vermont has led this nation in restorative justice, though I think if you look internationally, we're pretty woefully behind in where we could be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess my question for you is how you anticipate expanding and catching up with a level funded budget.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You're absolutely right. And I think there are some really exciting opportunities at our fingertips that we could take on. It'll be tough to do that at a level budget. It'll be very tough to do that if money is swept out of the DOC budget to other agencies to do other types of restorative justice work. And maybe that's the policy priority of the state. That's a decision for somebody else to make. I'll tell you what I would do. I think there's some ways to streamline and make more efficient the CJCs so that we can do more within that structure. I'd also like the CJCs to be operating within the correctional facilities. Our restorative justice work largely as a state is out in the communities. And we do not successfully, I think, in many times, bring the community into our facilities. That is a captive audience of people who are ripe for the benefits of this type of work. And yet we haven't yet meaningfully tackled that. So if you look to Norway or Germany, some of the more progressive carceral models around the world, that's the type of work that's happening inside the walls. And even the walls are a little different. But until we're really reaching in and targeting people when they're with us, serving that time and making that really valuable time for their recuperation, their reentry into society, we're going to be leaving a ton on the table.
I appreciate that. And one of the things that I have concern with the current sort of funding model is that it pits prevention work and community work against the in the system work. And I think that's really problematic because I actually think both are really important.
Yeah. And for me, that creates, I agree with you, and it creates for me, and I think the broader department, a philosophical challenge. What is the role of the Department of Corrections versus the role of other state agencies or community providers? Is our job, corrections job, to really get upstream Or is it to manage the group that is downstream now and it's other people's responsibility to get upstream? And I don't exactly know. I mean, I think we're actually highly effective in this work. And so I have been yearning to get upstream a little more because I think we could do it really well. But we run into some philosophical questions about, is that really the role of a corrections agency versus somebody else? I don't know if that's the AGO. I don't know if it's an organization like you're talking about, kind of an independent or new restorative justice group. But Derek and I have spent a good deal of time working through that kind of philosophy issue. But I agree, both are important, the upstream prevention side, and because people do make it downstream, whether we like it or not, targeting that audience is too very important. And how do we balance that? And the current construct doesn't do a nice job of helping us with that.
Any other questions for the Commissioner? Commissioner, thank you very much. And by the way, I'll just announce to the committee that Commissioner Demmel has been appointed to the Justice Center, CSG Justice Center Advisory Board. So I'm very happy that he's going to be joining me in Alabama. So don't ask me why we're going to Alabama.
I know, right?
I can tell you why we're going to Alabama.
Right.
Because the chair is a former state senator from Alabama and now head, I think, of the parole
Parole commission or something.
commission
Yeah.
or whatever they have now.
My wife was very confused when I told her I was
Very confused
Montgomery.
about going to Alabama for a month.
But CSG is a big proponent of this work as well.
I'm excited to have you join me down there.
Yeah.
Join that board with Shep and I, since pretty much it's an exception for, I think it's about over 20 years that I've been on that board.
Yeah.
It's done some remarkable stuff, and so I'm really pleased that you joined it.
Yeah, very excited about that opportunity.
So see you in Alabama or not.
Probably
They do
before.
sometimes pick interesting places. They sent me to
Well-
an elections conference in Texas.
Yeah, well, actually.
I mean, of all the places that might need some help.
Like, we were there to learn from them.
Well, you know, actually, it was interesting getting to know the current chair over the years, because he was chair of their Judiciary Committee, and he and I spent a lot of time talking about what's doable in your state. And he had to be very careful with justice reinvestment, because he'd have gotten his head chopped off.
Yeah.
If anybody really knew, the justice reinvestment program.
And yet they had a great deal of
They had a fairly
success.
forward-looking justice
around the country,
reinvestment program, that he was able to institute. So it's all
Yeah.
relative.
Well, thank you again for the
Thank you.
opportunity. I'll hang around if you do have additional
Great.
questions.
Willa Farrell is from the Attorney General's office and the head of what we actually call diversion.
Good morning, Willa Farrell, Attorney General's office. I was here last week and spoke briefly about the court diversion budget and the pressures we see this year and our request for an additional just under 300,000 that we've targeted for 4 of the grantees that we work with, where we see exceedingly high caseload. This is not to minimize the pressures that other community-based organizations face. The governor did include a 3% increase in the line item for court diversion and pretrial services, which is a separate line item in the budget under the Attorney General's office.
Refresh my memory of how many you fund.
We fund 12 organizations. In Caledonia and Essex is one organization serves those 2 counties, and in Franklin, Grand Isle, one organization serves those 2. I did provide a document, I think you may have a color version that Ben printed for you that
But
illustrates,
I put it actually. Where is it? I met him. Oh, thank you.
and this might be a helpful context piece for this morning's discussion. So this is a document I developed with Derek and Mia Dubnik and Lindy Goudreau from DCF, as well as community providers. So you can see that it is confusing, and yet in some, and I even have a little cheat sheet that I have developed that details there's in the AGO, the DOC and DCF, we jointly fund 6 organizations. The AGO and the DOC jointly fund 8 organizations. AGO and DCF fund 4, and DCF funds a single organization, Addison. And this morning, I actually started a Venn diagram, which is not obviously ready for publication, but I've been trying to think about different ways to both capture the complexity and, which I think may be a starting point for trying to get to a simpler and more streamlined system. I do want to note that I also think of restorative justice not as, it's not an organization, it's not a program, it's really a set of principles and an approach to work. And so I see value in restorative justice principles imbued in, I mean, I probably couldn't name a state organization or a part of our societies where I wouldn't see value for these principles. So I do see value in having separate parts of state government having its own funding stream dedicated to that approach, those principles. And I agree that certainly for the 12 program directors whom I work with closely and those who have multiple funding streams, it is a lot of work to have 3 different budgets, 3 different financial reporting mechanisms. And I do think there's opportunities for ways the state could streamline and that work. So I think I would stop at that point in terms of that. And I do have a few comments about H 645, or I could wait if you wanted to.
There may be questions about the chart here. I know we discussed your actual budget last week.
Yes.
But seeing that there are about 5 or 6 agencies that are funded only by DOC. And then how does that, like, AGO doesn't fund Greater Barrie Community Justice, but does the Washington County Diversion Program. So
Yes.
can you explain the difference between the two, since you're funding one, DOC's the other, and Commissioner Derek want to pipe in? It's just very confusing if you're in the Greater Barrie area.
It is.
I guess, I don't know. Greater Barrie doesn't include Montpelier, I guess.
No, my understanding. Well, I think you alluded to this earlier, Senator Sears, with the historical context. So court diversion was formed in the 70s, and the Washington Court Diversion Program was established as a nonprofit then. Subsequently, DOC developed community justice center grants, and there were these organizations in Barrie and Montpelier that developed, as I understand the history, in response to those funding opportunities. I will, the work they do is different. But in the agency we fund, the work they do is under the grant from the Attorney General's office, which is all services mandated by statute. And then they also receive a grant from DCF to do barge services. And then the 2 community justice centers in this county have grants from DOC to do the work that Derek referenced earlier. So there's different services, even though those services all share the same values and principles about how they do that work.
Interesting. They're funding Northern Essex County too. I have no idea how many people live in Northern Essex County. Can't be many.
I wish I could remember the numbers from redistricting, but I can't. It is not many.
Not many. Anyway.
So maybe just to build off that, I'll just touch on one aspect of H 645, and I realize we may speak more about the bill on Friday. In the bill that passed the House, there is, I guess you might call it a requirement that our office continue to fund all the organizations that DOC funds to do pre-charge services now. So in this situation, we would be funding for, I think it's 3 or 4 years. There's a sunset provision there. 3 organizations in Washington County. to my way of thinking and our office's way of thinking, it is a more understandable and coherent system if pre-charge diversion as envisioned in H 645 is included with the post-charge diversion that the office currently provides a grant to one organization to serve all of the county. So that is an area that I find troubling in the version that passed the House. I think it is the policy framework of H 645, I think, is to combine, expand diversion and include pre-charge diversion, upstream work with services that are earlier in the system, that are working with people that have not been adjudicated. So if we're simplifying that at the state level, I would advocate we also simplify it in the community level where prosecutors and law enforcement won't have to navigate, where do I send this referral versus that referral? And that on the ground level, there's more integration in the delivery of those services.
Yeah, Bennington's already in, and many other communities.
Yes.
Chittenden,
Yeah.
Lamoille,
Yes,
I think to some extent, Wyndham County, are already at that point.
Yes.
Where there's one organization that does everything. And I've spent a lot of time with that organization, and they do a tremendous job, and their leader is a tremendous person. Letha does just terrific work. And they've even gotten into the after school with their lounge program. I think it's called the lounge program. And so they're doing things that are beyond what one would expect. And so I think it's a good model. But if you're funding 5 different Washington County programs, it gets confusing. And I'd be confused as a police officer. If I'm in Berlin, am I in the greater Barry area, or am I?
I mean, I agree that in those counties, and there are about 5 or 6 of them, where there's one organization providing the full array of services from different parts of state government, as well as others perhaps, that there's those are really wonderful organizations that are serving their communities well, that are highly respected, that have a lot of have depth, in terms of cross-training.
So I would appreciate on Friday your thoughts on how we can improve H 645 to encompass a more rational system. Senator Norris and then Senator Bowski.
Yes, thank you. Just so I'm,
Yes.
Is this your chart here?
It is, yes.
Okay. The question that I have is, I'm looking at Chittenden, Franklin, Grand Isle,
Yes.
Lamoille, Washington. I'm assuming that all these individuals, people within these counties are doing the same services.
Correct, yes,
And so I'm looking at the caseload
yes.
and one Chittenden, one Franklin, and one Washington. Why the disparaging numbers or salary benefits between the 3 counties?
So we provide grants to organizations, some of which are nonprofits, and in Franklin, Grand Isle, the city of St. Albans, and so each organization has its own pay scale, as is Chittenden is under the city of Burlington. In Lamoille and Washington, those are 501c3 nonprofits. So each organization, there are disparate pay packages, benefits, and the figures I used to come up with that number, I drew from their current budgets where they provide information about salaries and benefits. And then I provided an administrative rate, which is sort of an average.
And what is the administrative rate?
I put in 20% there.
But what does that
Oh,
mean?
that is, so the additional costs to have an employee, from a new computer to additional supervision, maybe more office space,
Okay.
those sorts of,
All right,
yeah,
thank you.
non-personnel.
Locally bargained contracts.
Well, they're the bargaining, maybe if you could rephrase the.
Well, in other words, the city of Burlington
Yes, they
controls what they're.
Yeah, and the nonprofits have their own, the organization in Wyndham County is a nonprofit, it has a union, others, it's a more board-driven process about setting pays.
Yeah. So my concern, in looking at this chart and to Senator Norris's point is around geographic justice and
Yes.
ensuring that every Vermonter has access to these types of services. And my understanding is that is part of the intent of 645 is to
Yes.
help universalize what every Vermonter has access to.
Yes.
So I'm correct in that?
Yes, that
Okay.
is one of the goals of H645 is to increase access so that more people in Vermont and have similar and access to similar services.
And then my question for you, or my additional question for you, I guess that was also a question, is around sort of the budgeting. What are we budgeting to the AGO for these pretrial services? And it's probably somewhere, I just have a huge stack of budget paperwork,
Yes,
so.
So in the governor's recommend, which includes a 3% increase, would be $2,972,811.
Okay.
I wish I could round numbers more quickly in my head. So we're asking for 296,700 in addition, which would bring, should the you all agree, to 3,269,511.
That is really helpful. And I remember in your budget presentation too, you had some information around the cost of providing your services versus the cost of incarceration. Can you remind me of the savings if we're able to divert people before entering into the downstream system?
Yes. So what the data I had shared came from a study done by Crime Research Group that looked at prosecution, the costs, not necessarily supervision by DOC. And so the example I pulled from was a simple assault charge. In court diversion, the cost was $216. If that simple assault charge prosecuted and leading to conviction in the court was $1,480. So, $1,200 more.
And is it safe to assume that that is not capturing the whole cost of conviction? As you said, it would not capture supervision costs or any of those other costs.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
So,
Thanks.
It's
Pretty
safe.
significant cost savings.
Yeah, and your numbers is 3.4 million, let's call it.
Yes.
And the corrections is 3 million. So let's round it off. That's gets us to 6.3 million. And forgetting anything from justice reinvestment that might come in for these programs. And then we have on top of that, whatever DCF provides, and we'll hear that next. So that you're looking at a total budget for these programs there, even though corrections provides funding for more programs than the AGO. That's what that's what I'm taking away from this conversation. Senator?
So I just had a quick question on your 2.9 million and change. Is
No,
that-
they're 3.4.
What was the figure?
The
that-
corrections is
This is,
2.9.
the governor's recommend is the 2.9.
So this is where you are, and this, with the governor's recommend is 2.972.
Yes.
Okay, with the additional 296, they're looking at 3.2.
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know what the House did in their budget. They voted on it, so I'm not worried about it. We're gonna be in different worlds between the House and the Senate on the budget, I guess. I heard they raised about 130 million in taxes, which I think is pretty unrealistic.
I think it's all about who we're taxing and what we're taxing.
Understood. Didn't mean to get into a debate about the taxes.
Understood.
It's just, I don't think the Senate will be raising 140 million. Knowing members of the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committees. Anything else for Will?
I know. I look forward to coming back Friday and talking more about it.
Yeah, I think in light of H645, we need to understand what the goal, I'm confused. Seems to be some good things and some bad things in there, or things that may not work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Well, I think I'm gonna go to, is DCF, is Heather McLean?
There is it.
Yeah, I'd rather get DCF and then we'll hear from the, community justice centers.
Good morning, Senator Sears. For the record, I'm Lindy Boudreau. I'm the Juvenile Justice Director for DCF. I'm
Yep.
joined by Heather McLean. I had prepared some thoughts for today, but based on the conversation, I'm not exactly sure where the committee wants me to go. I did submit,
What we want to understand is what you fund and who you fund, and you've given us a chart here, this chart, which I think tells us who you fund and how many participants and the allocation. And then so why does DCF fund, what do you, plan to accomplish in funding these programs? You've been doing it for years.
sorry, go ahead.
Was that a confusing question? Probably was.
I don't think she.
I can give a little bit of a brief overview of the BARGE program. So we've been funding the Balanced and Restorative Justice program since 1999. We started it initially with the OJJDP federal funds, and the state saw great services come through that program, so we assumed the program in 2005, fully using general fund at that time. We have, as you can see from the chart, we have 11 providers that are currently providing services to at-risk and justice-involved youth, ages 10 through age 21. That includes both delinquency cases, truancy concerns, youth who are beyond the control of their parents, and youthful offenders. And the 11 provider network providers cover all 12 counties or 14 counties, all 12 DCF district offices. So we do have 100% coverage around the state. The program, the referrals that come through are varied for the BARGE program. So we've included in statute different points throughout the sequential intercept where youth might come into contact with law enforcement or the justice system or the system in general, and have offered opportunities for off-ramps for BARGE to be able to provide supports to youth and families that do not include a companion DCF case. So part of the BARGE program is to try to provide those prevention efforts where DCF cannot typically. We're more of a reactionary system, and BARGE is, in my opinion, our prevention opportunity for youth who are at risk of justice involvement or are currently justice involved. So we really try to provide supports and services to youth and families to limit the amount of time that they're in the system or limit the extent to which they're involved in the system. Willa mentioned earlier, and I really, this sticks with me as well, that restorative justice is not a tool, it's not a program, it's a philosophy and it's a way of being. And BARGE really exemplifies that with the youth and the families that they serve. Derek, Willa, and myself meet monthly as the 3 state funders. And we've been doing that for years to talk through opportunities and explore opportunities where we might, as state systems, be able to offer a more unified and streamlined approach to the various providers, because we do know that it is confusing and it is hard for folks to manage the various expectations of the 3 state funding agencies. That's something we continue to do and continue to explore ways where we can support the provider network as best we can. As you can see, we currently have a budget of 2.2 million for the 11 providers. Last year, they served 846 youth with those funds. And I included the various types of referrals here because I know H645 was something that was being talked about, or I was asked to provide some thoughts on that. And BARGE does provide pre-charge services to youth. It's not traditionally the go-to in most counties. That's typically the CJCs for that service, but they do provide that service, but they're not specifically named in H645. So we're fairly neutral on the bill at this point.
So I had a question, and this is less about 645 and more about the budget. Can you remind me of what the barge budget increase would need to be to fully implement Raise the Age?
Sure. So, yeah, we appreciate your considering the expansion of the barge program to support implementation of the Raise the Age initiative. As you know, we at DCF support the research behind the expansion of juvenile jurisdiction, and having a response that's tailored to youth's developmental age. So certainly, we want to be in a position where our system is in a place where we can support not only the youth we have, but also the incoming roles. We do think that barge has a role in that. Through the fact that they could help support our declining systems capacity by assuming responsibility, primary responsibility, I should say, of non-DCF custody probation cases. In the December report that you're speaking about, Senator, the original number the number that we used at that point for that population of youth was 141. And at that point, we were looking for recommending that we would need an additional $925,000 to support additional program or additional FTEs for the barge program to support assuming those youth. That number has grown. So when I ran the numbers in preparation for today, in February, that number has grown to 165 youths who are not in DCF custody but on probation. And so with that, we would need $1.1 million, which would be approximately 1 FTE per program for barge to assume responsibility of those cases. And you'll note when you look at the referral sources or the referral types rather, that they currently do serve that population, that this would be a distinct difference in that primary supervision and supports would come off DCF and they would go to barge. So that's how the system would, the squeeze, if you will, on our staff would be alleviated because the primary responsibility would be moved to the barge program.
As a follow-up to that, have you done any estimates in the sort of downstream cost savings of moving those juveniles out of the place they're currently in and into the juvenile justice system?
I have not.
Okay.
I'm not sure that you've done that, Heather, at this point. We have not done that.
Well, it would be interesting because if you assume that they're somewhere in the system, either the adult or the juvenile, there's a cost, and that cost is borne by the state, and it just depends on which department. It may be that corrections sees fewer 19-year-olds than they currently see, and DCF sees obviously more.
I will
I think
note.
that was the evidence on the 18-year-olds. The DCF saw fewer 18-year-olds, and DCF saw more and DOC saw less. I feel I got to go somewhere.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important to look at because when we're looking at a more successful outcome and less involvement with the system, that will save the system money over time.
We will, but it's hard. What's difficult is there are fixed costs associated with everything, and the numbers need to be so significant that you would close a wing of a prison, for example, or shut down a number of probation officers you needed in one district because of the change. And then you may need more social workers in that same district. It's hard because so much of it is fixed.
Yeah, so to your point, Senator Sears, I do just want to point out that although those cases would be, the day-to-day work would primarily sit outside of DCF, we would still have an open case because we would not be suggesting or recommending that our legislatively defined oversight for these cases be shifted to barge. So we would still have to have an open case because we would be the party to the case. So similar to our youthful offender cases where DOC is the lead, DCF still holds primary responsibility for all of the family court process, which includes all of the writing of the reports, the filing, any paperwork. Even if DOC is the lead, we still have a role and we still have to meet with those youth monthly. And we're still a party to the case. So we're still working those cases. The hope would be that it would be less work because barge would be doing it, the day-to-day management, also the hope is that because Barge has the opportunity to bring that restorative lens in all aspects of their engagement with the youth and family. So my hope as the Barge program manager for DCF is that they would be able to reduce the amount of time that those youth are on supervision with the department and with the courts. Because they would have the ability to hopefully spend more time with them, be more attentive, and really bring in all of the components of the restorative process and engagement with the youth and the family. So to Senator Shear's point, it is hard to talk about cost because we still would need those social workers on our roles, because we still do have a role. The hope is that it wouldn't be as intense. Heather, do you have any questions?
Yeah, are there any other questions for either Lindy or Heather? DCF. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
And I did leave off Rachel Jolly so far, if she has any comments. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah. Thank you. For the
Thank
record,
you.
For the record, my name is Rachel Jolly. I'm the CEDO Assistant Director. I lead the Burlington Community Justice Center in the city of Burlington. So I'm hopefully will keep my comments brief and relate it to what we've heard this morning already. We'd like to comment on the three primary sources of funding received by the various state-funded restorative justice centers. So for the Attorney General's office, we support the AGO's funding request of $3.2 million spread out over 12 organizations. With DCF, we support the phased plan to increase Barge funding by a total of $1 million over the course of 4 years, with what would be the third year this year of a $250,000 allocation that's spread out over 11 organizations for a total of 2.4, essentially 2.5 million. And with DOC, we support a 10% increase over the 2024 allocation of 3.5 million spread out over 17 organizations for a total of 3.9 million. We understand that the source of that funding was from different places, as you heard from Commissioner Demmel. It may have been one-time funding, and we did understand that we were buying time to come out with a bigger plan, and we are bigger, we're just presenting our interest of what we think it takes to run these programs. And at this point we just want to make the point that 3.9 million, the 10% increase over this past year's funding is what the 17 organizations are asking for. And I really appreciate Senator Vyhoski's point about level funding is essentially cuts. And we, just like the rest of the state, are experiencing the inflationary costs to our insurance, to our rents, to our utility bills. And so that's what's behind these increases. And further, as it relates to DOC funding, we are also advocating for a line item in the budget that would help increase transparency and clarity, I think, for legislators as well as the centers themselves.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I hope. Yep, you might have gotten a copy of my remarks this morning on the bottom of the first page around 3 separate budget sections. Currently, unlike with court diversion and pretrial services under the AGO that has a specific line item, so it's very clear about what we're being allocated, the 17 DOC funded programs have not had that benefit of that kind of clarity. The DOC funded programs have been funded under section 338.1, which is inaccurately entitled Justice Reinvestment 2. So only approximately 900,000 of the approximately 10 million in this section is for justice reinvestment. Most of the funding goes to transitional housing and CJCs. So we're advocating for 3 separate budget sections so that the funding purpose is clear, and that's around the justice reinvestment thing. We also just think it would be if under DOC's budget, there was something, again, as you were talking about with Derek Miodovnik around the CJC, that it's a bit of problematic language. If we had the name of the programming, for instance, restorative justice programming and reentry services, that could have a line item under the DOC budget draft would make it clear for future years of what the allocations is for the centers that are funded by DOC.
Okay. I understand that now. Senator Bowles.
So I have a question about, that may have to come to me in parts from multiple different people, and that is the number of people that the whole restorative justice system serves in a year. And I recognize that sort of multiple different systems.
Yeah, I was just doing the math as we were hearing from different speakers today. I didn't quite get what Lindy had mentioned was the total barge. I think it was around 830 perhaps. So based on that, that would be a total of a little over 7,600 for the year by all three systems. In fiscal year 23, according to the statewide report that they released, DOC served 2,386 people. The AGOs served 4,397. And again, I didn't quite get the exact number for barge, but I think it was around 830. But Lindy, feel free to correct me.
846.
Okay. So maybe it was 7,700 might be the total math, or at least it's over 7,600.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm just trying to do the math here because like the requests that we're hearing is under $10 million to support almost 8,000 Vermonters, and the return on investment for that seems to me to be a bit of a no-brainer. So that's helpful for me to just do that math out. So thank you.
I appreciate that.
8,580,000 is the total for all three state agencies, and then you have the request for an additional million from DOC, I guess.
Yeah, I did the math of for the requests and came up with 9,671,000. So yes,
same ballpark.
I think we were just doing different math.
Figure that out. JFO is good at that. Any other questions? Thanks for joining us on short notice.
Thanks for having me.
So, just to sum up, we will be looking at all the different budgets. I think we've got over 15 million in requests over the governor's recommend. And somehow we need to understand what our box is from the appropriations committee and try to fold things into that box.
Yes.
After that, we'll take a break until 10:30, see if we can get